Hello, everyone. Today we are with Alan Smith, who devoted his entire career to European cooperation in education, working initially for the German University Rectors Conference and the European Institute of Education and Social Policy. Alan participated actively in developing Erasmus, and later in his career, he held various positions at the European Commission, in particular developing and coordinating the adult learning program Grundtvig. In 2015, he was awarded life membership of EPA. Hi, Alan.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me.
Nice Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Perfect. So we already heard something about you, but please tell us something more about yourself. Who are you and how did you personally become interested in prison education?
I guess that's probably the most difficult question anybody can be asked. Who are you? So I think I will stick to bare facts rather than giving the impression of possible fake news. So the bare bones. Born in England, grew up at least youth years in Northern Ireland, formative experience. Studied German at University College London and at the University of Marburg in Germany. Fell in love during that time. The beautiful German girl who 50 years later is still with me, thank goodness. Yeah, and then stayed in Germany to work after my degree. First, as you said, with the Rectors Conference, then moved to Paris and then on to Brussels for the European Commission. And after retiring in 2011, I moved back to Germany. And in the meantime, in protest against the Brexit nonsense decision, I have taken on German citizenship. So in protest against all that. So that in a nutshell are those bits of me that I would divulge in public, let's say.
Okay.
As far as prison education is concerned, yeah, you've said it already in that I spent the first half of my career in higher education. Amongst other things, I was director of the Erasmus Bureau for the first 5 years of the program and was the lucky person to think of the title, by the way, of the Erasmus program. But the second half of my career was within the European Commission and in particular in adult learning. And it was just after I took on responsibility for the Grundtvig program in the year 2000 that a leaflet fluttered across my desk. We had paper in those days and not just computers. And this leaflet invited me to participate in a meeting of what were described as the National Directors and Coordinators of Prison Education.
Okay.
And since I didn't know anything about prison education, and as I say, I'd just taken over responsibility for adult learning, and also since I'd never been to Malta, I thought it would be a good opportunity to get to know both prison education and Malta, and decided to go. And there I met some of the wonderful people who work in prison education, some of the stalwarts of the EPAA also, and I quickly came to the conclusion that this was something which should be given much greater attention within the adult learning community than had been the case so far at European level. So that's really how I was hooked on prison education.
Perfect.
Nice. I think it's a nice coincidence because Thomas and I also met in Malta some years ago as well.
And also started our international career in prison education there.
Oh, nice.
It's true.
On the right side of the bars, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Alan. How, in your view, does prison education fit into the overall picture of adult learning? Are there any significant differences in teaching inside and outside the walls?
Well, as I said, I came to prison education from adult learning, and I must say that all these years on, 20 years on, I'm still as convinced as I ever was that prison education should be regarded very much as being part and parcel of adult education, of adult learning generally. I think there are various ways of looking at this. The first is a human rights aspect. The right to education exists for everyone. And it's too often overlooked that this right, which is enshrined in international conventions and even in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, for example, is not a right which people lose when they are sent to prison for some time. So there is very often, very much this first aspect of human rights. The second aspect I would point to is a social one. Both adult education generally and prison education itself can contribute very much to society. And we're talking here, in most cases anyway, about people who are very much marginalized. And prison education reaches out to people who are very often ones who've had a negative experience of formal education at school, who have lower educational attainment levels than the population at large, at least on average. And prison education, like adult education generally in society, provides a second chance to learn and to get equipped with the qualifications and competences that people need to be a really active member of society. And by that, I don't just mean the basics of reading and writing. I mean also numeracy and all the other types of literacy that people talk about today. So digital literacy, financial literacy, consumer literacy, signing up to a healthy lifestyle, active citizenship, all these things are vital aspects of competence and literacy, and prison education in its field and adult learning in general contribute very much to this, it seems to me. And a third aspect regarding the social aspect or the social component of all this, it may not be the primary purpose of prison education, but it certainly does contribute to various other social policy goals in society. Here I'm thinking of things like anti-radicalization or tackling substance abuse. And of course, prison education helps to avoid higher levels of reoffending, and the cost, the price of reoffending is quite enormous, both for the individuals, of course, but also to society in social terms and even economically, because it makes very bad economic sense to have people cooped up in prison for long periods if there are ways of avoiding that. So the human rights aspect, the social aspect, and then if we look at the kind of intrinsic strategies and qualities of what makes up good adult learning, we can see that reflected very much in good prison education as well. Thinking in terms of developing innovative approaches and strategies for non-formal learning. The whole idea of putting the learner at the center is something which is clearly absolutely essential for prison education, but is a general slogan for adult education generally, or a general principle for adult education as a whole. Finding creative and innovative means of allowing people to demonstrate what they can do in terms of competences, in terms of cognitive knowledge, in terms of skills of all kinds. And also the guidance and counseling services that you need in order to underpin all of this. So I think that there's a lot of parallels between good prison education and good adult education, if you like. And indeed, although it may not have happened so much in the past, I think there are many ways in which adult education generally can actually learn from prison education. So this is what I would say in regard to that. I see them very much as being part and parcel of one family, and prison education not just being seen in the justice context, but very much in the education and learning context as well.
I agree completely on this. It's really a question of education and not a question of security or execution of sentences. Okay. During your time at the Commission, you were instrumental in boosting the EU support for prison education. What form did this take? How could you foster something about in prison education?
Yeah, that's a lovely question in a sense. It gives me a nice platform to think back as to what we were trying to achieve and maybe did achieve to some extent at that time. And that work has, of course, continued in the years since I left. I think if I look back, I think I can genuinely say that we made a difference in terms of putting prison education on the map, at least within the European discussions on adult education. Prison education was incorporated into the European agenda on adult learning as one of the priorities for member states' adult education policies. We made prison education a funding priority, one of several within the Grundtvig program, and over 100 projects and partnerships were supported during that time. We held a mega European conference with people from over 20 countries, bringing together the policymakers and the practitioners, the people from national prison services, together with the project coordinators of EU Grundtvig projects and so on, accompanied by very widespread documentation and underpinned by a series of studies specifically on prison education, which we commissioned. One, for example, on the state of the art. What does prison education look like? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the challenges? And another setting out the results of previous research and analysis on prison education. So in all these ways, I think we tried very much to put it on the map. And EPA, by the way, was very much part of this. And I've been extremely pleased and grateful that the association has formed a kind of place, a location on its website, which has enabled us to pull all of the documentation from those important years together, and also complemented by some newer work on Erasmus+. And so that's one very concrete way in which EPA is contributing at the EU level.
Okay.
Okay, so we hope you may like to present some of your results in the next edition of our newsletter. And we are of course delighted that the EPA has been able to help us regard the website. But more generally, how do you see the role of the EPA in this context?
Yeah, I've been describing so far very much the practical cooperation which we made possible through supporting European projects. And I think it is extremely important that people should work together across national borders to share experience, to develop good practice and so on. So I think this practical aspect is terribly important. Develops personal relationships as well, of course, in the professional kind, sometimes beyond the professional kind, perhaps in the field. The problem is that projects come and projects go. They finish, of course, when the funding finishes, most of them at any rate. And so you need something more in place. And there are a number of ways that one can think of doing this, and organizations which contribute. One is Europris, which has been more recently formed. The second is the electronic platform for adult learning in Europe, launched by the European Commission, which provides kind of, as its name implies, an electronic platform for keeping people together. But the really important role in all of this is indeed played by EPEA, because there's no way of replacing this possibility that people have through EPEA of staying together as a prison education community across Europe. And I think that's the very important second pillar alongside the more concrete practical cooperation within European projects. Having said that, I think that I would like to see EPEA personally play an even greater role. And that seems to me that it might well be possible. If you think of the various ways that the EPA has contributed to European cooperation in the past, through launching projects of its own, of course, with the EU support, providing advisory services both to the Commission and to other people out in the field who want to organize projects. The website you've already mentioned. But I think that more could be done if the association had two things. First of all, more money. Well, there are ways and means of accessing those funds for European associations through the Erasmus Mundus, the Erasmus Plus program, rather. But secondly, if I may be allowed the comment, I would love to see an EPEA which has a broader membership base. It seems to me, I've been to many EPEA conferences over the years. It is the European Association. But there are a handful of countries which really seem to carry the work of the association, and it would be great to see it placed on a broader European base. But it's not really up to me to be critical, so I hope you'll take that comment kindly.
No, it's an encouragement to think more in this direction, because at least what is concerning Anna and me, we agree what you are saying. I think, or we would like to have more members in more countries. That's for sure, and we see it also in the conferences. Where some countries have overweight and other countries are not even represented. And I think for a European association, that's not really a good picture. So we really have to look forward to have this funding and more resources in every way to broaden our basis. That's for us, it's clear, but that's also why we do these interviews. Maybe they are seen, they attract more people, and yeah, that's one part of the action we take or we took, just to attract more prison educators to the UK. So we had now the big picture. Let's go also a bit to the ground and to the teacher itself. We asked this question to all of our interview partners, so I will ask you too. What qualities do you think are essential for a teacher when teaching in prison, or for a teacher in adult education in general?
Yeah. Well, I have to admit that I've never taught personally in a prison, so I suppose I'm not really the right person to answer the question in that sense, at least as far as prison education is concerned. Nonetheless, perhaps an observation. As I say, I haven't been a prison teacher, but I have been a very keen observer of the prison education scene for many years. And it seems to me that there are kind of two schools of thought about this business. As to whether prison education teacher is a different kind of animal from an adult education teacher in general, or should be. The first school of thought says basically, look, teaching in prison is completely different. The teaching environment, the learning environment is different from in your local adult education center outside. The profile of the learners is very different. The prison teacher is often called upon to have a much more multifaceted role vis-a-vis the learner, I would say, probably than the majority of adult education teachers are outside, through the very personal relationship which can develop. And partly because the numbers are so, in inverted commas, good in prison, where you have a fairly small number of learners opposite each learning facilitator. So there's one school of thought that sees these two as being very, very different. The other school of thought is the opposite and says more or less, to be a good prison teacher, you need to be a good adult education teacher first and foremost. So the qualities that you bring to both would be very similar, and in particular the training that you need for both, even if there is some specific further training that's needed for teaching in prison, also needs to be basically similar. So I suppose some amalgamation of the 2 points of view would probably be the right approach. I think I've said what I think about being an adult education teacher, although I don't like the expression adult education teacher in general a bit earlier on. A lot of it has to do with putting the learner at the center and not just making an offer of take it or leave it, but rather trying to show some interest in what the learning needs and interests of the learners are. And in accordance with that, fashioning what you have to say in terms of content and in terms of methodology around that. And I'm sure that goes for prison education just as for adult education in general.
Okay, I think you're completely right. While you're speaking, I'm coming with more and more questions, so we'll have to leave it for the next time, because I'm working inside and outside already for 20 years. And and I have a lot of questions, but maybe we will do another interview later on.
Bear in mind, I've never myself taught in a prison, so I'm talking in purely theoretical terms. And
no, sometimes it helps when you know a view from outside. It helps also to sharpen the sight on it. So
you're very kind, Thomas.
Yeah, no. It's my experience. Sometimes it's really helpful as an external person to ask all the stupid questions, you know, which are not stupid at all, but which exactly go to the point, and therefore sometimes a certain distance helps to see things clearer, because if your daily routine is within the prison, yeah, you may lose this distance on your profession.
I'm sure that's true, yeah.
All right, and then the last questions we always ask our partners is what advice would you give to a teacher new to prison education, or for a teacher in adult education in general?
Oh, well, as I said before, it would be presumptuous of me really to offer very much advice, but I suppose in both cases, it's probably good to think of it in terms of being well prepared on the one hand, but perhaps not going into it with too many preconceived ideas, not to say prejudices on the other. I mean, I don't think nobody goes into prison education with prejudices in the negative sense, but maybe some preconceived ideas about what it's going to be like. And perhaps it's good to be open and willing to take new things on board and so on. I found it very compelling watching the interview with my predecessor here. You kindly sent me in that direction, and I found myself agreeing with lots and lots of things that she said. One was to do with empathy, the capacity to understand the situation and needs of the people you are trying to help in the learning process, or the capacity to motivate people to go on to further learning in very difficult circumstances in prison very often, when the learning environment isn't very conducive to continuous or continuity in the learning and teaching process. So empathy and motivation, and perhaps also a third quality, which I think she also mentioned, around creating a safe learning environment. And by that I don't mean from the security point of view, because presumably that type of safety is not the primary responsibility of teachers, but rather giving the learners, the prisoner learners, the feeling that this is a safe and open environment that they can open up in and can open themselves up to these additional learning opportunities which they're being given. So I suppose it boils down to what we've said several times already, namely putting the learner at the center of all this as much as one possibly can. But that's a very glib phrase to be used by somebody like me who's a long way from the day-to-day practice of all of this. It's certainly much more easily said than done. But what I would say is that when it functions well, when you have a successful relationship between the teacher and the learner, or the learning facilitator and the learner, both in adult education and in prison education, it can give rise to really life-changing experiences and life-changing development. And I think if there's one thing which has attracted me to prison education and kept me in touch with it over the years, it's really that feeling of admiration for the people who work under very difficult circumstances very often in this field. COVID has also highlighted additional problems that people have. The admiration that people stay with it and are willing to provide these life-changing opportunities for the learners that they're working with.
Yes, okay. So I think we already come to an end.
Some of us are coming to an end very quickly, Thomas.
No, I don't think so, because the time went very fast, and I think we are we were tackling quite some different points in prison education, and I have the feeling that we could go on talking for hours. And I remember your appearance in the conference in Antwerp, in the EPA conference of Antwerp, and I really was impressed by your enthusiasm for adult education in general, but also prison education in particular. And therefore, I know that you are really an ambassador for adult education and help to motivate the educators and teachers to go on with their work. So I think, yeah, there would be hours left for talking to you. But okay, this interview has to have an end. And Anna?
Just to say, we're very honored that you agreed on having an interview with us, because for us, you're really, I don't know, as a referent in this world. So we're really very excited that you agreed to be with us today. So I'd like to thank you, and I'm sure the readers are going to be happy as well.
It's a real privilege, and I've been very happy to be with you. And I wish you all the very best for the continuation of your work, which is just so very important.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good night.